The forgotten cry for help. The deep silence of space was rarely broken, but when it was, the universe listened. A faint distress signal echoed through the void, a desperate plea for help. It was weak, barely holding together, but it traveled far beyond its intended range. In the heart of deep space, aboard the United Terran ship Resolute, Captain Elias Carter stood in the dimly lit command center. His sharp blue eyes scanned the readings on the main screen. The signal was old, its source distant, and yet something about it felt urgent. "Captain, we just picked up this transmission," said Lieutenant Mira Khan, her voice laced with concern. "It's an emergency distress call from an unknown species. The signal is barely holding. Should we patch it through?" Carter nodded. "Do it." The speakers crackled, and a weak voice filled the bridge. It was distorted, desperate, and full of fear. "Please, someone, anyone, help us. We are the Zorvan. We are dying. The Council abandoned us. The war, it is over, but they won't stop. Please, help." The message cut off abruptly. Silence. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. "The Zorvan," Carter muttered, running a hand through his short brown hair. "Never heard of them." Commander Lewis, his second-in-command, tapped on his console. "Checking records now. Small species, not part of the Galactic Council. Last reports say they were at war with the Vrogan Dominion, a ruthless expansionist empire. Seems like they lost." Carter's jaw tightened, and the Council just let this happen. "The Council doesn't interfere," Mira said bitterly. "If a race can't defend itself, they call it natural selection." Carter clenched his fists. He had seen this before, powerful empires crushing weaker civilizations, while the Galactic Council turned a blind eye. Earth had been lucky to survive its first encounter with the stars. The only reason humanity wasn't wiped out was because they had fought back, tooth and nail, proving they weren't weak. The bridge remained silent, waiting for his decision. "We need to move," Carter finally said. Commander Lewis frowned. "Captain, we don't know what's out there. That signal could be weeks old. The Zorvans might already be dead. Or they could still be holding on," Carter countered. "And if we don't help, who will?" A heavy pause. Then Mira spoke up. "I'll set the course." Lewis sighed, but didn't argue. The crew trusted Carter. He was the kind of captain who wouldn't turn his back on people in need, no matter how dangerous the situation. The Resolute engaged its engines, vanishing into the dark void of space, racing toward a dying world that had been forgotten by the galaxy. Days later, the Resolute emerged from hyperspace. The view before them sent a chill down the crew's spines. The Zorvan homeworld was in ruins. Fires raged across the surface. The skies were thick with smoke, barely visible through the scattered remains of what was once a fleet of warships. Broken vessels drifted lifelessly in orbit, their hulls shattered. "This," Mira whispered, "this isn't a battle. This is extermination." Carter's face darkened. "Scan for survivors," he ordered. Seconds passed. Then Mira's eyes widened. "Sir, there are still life signs on the planet. Not many, but they're there." Lewis looked at the radar. "Sir, we have a problem." A massive enemy fleet hung in low orbit. Vrogan warships, fully armed. Their massive hulls glowed in the dying sunlight, like vultures circling their prey. "They're still here," Carter muttered. The bridge was silent, the weight of reality settling in. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. This was a confrontation. And the Resolute was outnumbered. Carter took a deep breath. He could turn back now, leave before the Vrogans noticed them. That was the logical choice. But if they did, the Zorvans would be wiped out. He made his decision. "Prepare for an emergency descent," he ordered. The crew hesitated for only a moment before responding. They knew what this meant. They were diving straight into a war zone. The Resolute's engines roared to life, and the ship plunged toward the dying world below. The mission had just begun. The Resolute broke through the atmosphere of the Zorvan homeworld, its hull glowing as it descended rapidly. The planet below was a wasteland of destruction. Once thriving cities now lay in ruins, their towering structures reduced to skeletal remains. Smoke billowed from craters where orbital bombardments had scared the surface, and in the distance, the eerie glow of fires flickered against the darkened sky. Captain Carter's grip tightened on the armrest of his chair. The sight before him confirmed his worst fears. The Vrogans weren't just waging war, they were erasing the Zorvan race from existence. "Sir," scanning for the strongest cluster of survivors, Mira reported, her fingers moving quickly over the console. "I'm picking up a distress beacon. It's weak, but it's coming from an underground bunker near the capital." "How many life signs?" Carter asked. Mira hesitated. "Less than 200. And dropping fast." Carter exhaled sharply. "That's all that's left." Commander Lewis gave a grim nod. "Looks like it." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. An entire species, reduced to a few hundred survivors. If they didn't act fast, there wouldn't be anyone left to save. "We're going in," Carter said firmly. "Prepare the drop teams." The Resolute weaved through the ruined cityscape, avoiding debris and wreckage. As they neared the distress beacon's location, the ship's sensors flared with warnings. A Vrogan patrol was nearby, scanning for survivors. "Enemy gunships incoming," Lewis shouted. Carter reacted instantly. "Evasive maneuvers. Activate forward shields." The Resolute banked hard to the left as plasma bolts streaked through the air, barely missing its hull. The enemy ships were sleek and deadly, designed for rapid strikes. Against a single Terran vessel, they had the advantage. "Return fire," Carter ordered. The ship's automated turrets whirred to life, unleashing a barrage of laser fire. One Vrogan fighter exploded on impact, sending flaming debris crashing into a ruined building below. The other two split off, circling back for another attack. "Shields at 70%, Mira called out. "We won't last long in a firefight." Carter clenched his jaw. Time was against them. "Deploy ground teams now," he ordered. A section of the Resolute's hull slid open, and drop pods shot toward the surface. Inside them, Terran soldiers braced for impact. They had trained for hostile environments, but nothing could have prepared them for the sheer devastation that awaited them below. The first pod landed with a heavy thud. Soldiers poured out, weapons raised, scanning the surroundings. The air was thick with smoke and ash. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the ruins, a haunting reminder that they were not alone. Lieutenant Darius Holt led the squad forward. His orders were clear: secure the bunker and extract the survivors. They moved swiftly, navigating through broken streets littered with bodies, both Zorvan and Vrogan. Some had died fighting. Others had been executed where they stood. The Vrogans hadn't come for war. They had come for extermination. Holt's radio crackled. "Sir, we've reached the entrance to the bunker. It's sealed shut." "Blow it open," Holt ordered. A soldier rushed forward, planting a small explosive charge on the reinforced door. The squad took cover as the device detonated with a sharp boom, sending metal fragments flying. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. The bunker was barely holding together. Huddled in the dim light, dozens of Zorvans stared at the Terran soldiers with wide, fearful eyes. One of them, an elder with deep scars across his face, stepped forward. "You are not Vrogan," he said weakly. Holt lowered his weapon. "We're from Earth. We're here to help." For a moment, there was silence. Then one of the Zorvan children broke down in tears. Others followed, their bodies shaking with relief and exhaustion. But there was no time to celebrate. A deep rumble shook the ground. From above, the sky darkened as Vrogan warships descended. They had been spotted. The rescue had just become a battle for survival. The walls of the bunker trembled as explosions echoed from above. Dust and debris rained down, making the Zorvan survivors flinch in fear. Lieutenant Holt's radio crackled with static before a sharp voice broke through. "Holt, this is Carter. The Vrogans are sending reinforcements to your position. You need to move. Now. Holt glanced at the terrified Zorvans. Most of them were weak, malnourished, and barely able to stand. Some clung to each other, eyes filled with desperation. Others looked at the Terran soldiers with cautious hope, unsure if this was truly salvation or just another cruel trick of fate. "We have wounded," one of Holt's medics whispered. "Some of them won't make it if we move too fast." Holt clenched his jaw. Every instinct told him to hurry, but leaving even one behind was not an option. He pressed his communicator. "Carter, we're moving, but we've got injured civilians. We need an evac point that's clear of hostiles." A moment of silence. Then Carter's voice returned, tense but firm. "There's an open plaza 3 blocks north of your position. We can land there, but you'll be exposed during extraction." Holt looked at his squad. They understood what that meant. They would have to fight. "Understood. We're on our way." He turned to the Zorvans. "Stay close to us. No matter what happens, keep moving." They started their march through the ruined city, the sound of distant gunfire growing louder. The Vrogans had already landed, their patrols sweeping the area in search of survivors. The soldiers moved in tight formation, keeping the Zorvans in the center. Every street was a potential death trap, every shattered building a hiding spot for enemy snipers. A plasma bolt seared through the air, striking just inches from Holt's head. He dove behind cover as more shots followed. The Vrogans had spotted them. Contact. 12 o'clock. Terran soldiers returned fire, their rifles lighting up the darkness. The first wave of Vrogans fell quickly, their bodies slumping against the rubble. But more were coming, moving fast and aggressive, their war cries piercing through the chaos. A young Zorvan child stumbled, too weak to keep up. Holt rushed forward, scooping the child into his arms without hesitation. Plasma bolts whizzed past, scorching the ground where the child had fallen just moments before. "Keep moving," he shouted. The plaza was just ahead, but the final stretch was a death zone, wide open, with no cover. If they ran now, they would be sitting ducks. Carter's voice crackled in Holt's earpiece. "We're overhead, but the LZ is hot. We need a window to land." Holt gritted his teeth. "Understood. Give us fire support." Above, the Resolute's cannons roared to life, unleashing destruction upon the advancing Vrogan forces. The enemy scrambled, momentarily thrown into disarray. "This is our chance. Go." The soldiers rushed forward, shielding the Zorvans as best they could. Plasma fire rained down from all directions. A Terran soldier took a hit to the shoulder, but another grabbed him, dragging him along. The Resolute's ramp lowered, and crew members waved frantically. "Get them inside," Holt barked. One by one, the Zorvans were pulled aboard. The last few seconds felt like an eternity as enemy fire intensified. Just as Holt reached the ramp, a plasma bolt struck dangerously close, sending him stumbling. Strong hands grabbed him, yanking him inside. The ramp sealed shut. The Resolute shot upward, engines roaring as it climbed toward the safety of orbit. Below, the city continued to burn, but for the first time in a long while, hope had survived. As the Resolute broke through the planet's atmosphere, the tension inside the ship was thick. The Zorvans huddled together, their wide eyes darting between the human soldiers and the unfamiliar metallic walls around them. Many of them had never seen the inside of a spaceship before, especially not one built by humans. Lieutenant Holt wiped the sweat and dirt from his face as he turned to his team. They had made it out, but barely. He saw burn marks on their armor, fresh cuts, and exhaustion in their eyes. But no one had been left behind. That was all that mattered. Dr. Elaine Carter, the ship's chief medical officer, rushed into the cargo hold with her team. Her eyes widened at the sight of the Zorvans, some of whom were barely conscious. "We need to get them to the medbay," she said, already checking the pulse of an older Zorvan who looked dangerously weak. Holt nodded and turned to his soldiers. "Help them. Get the wounded stabilized." The soldiers sprang into action, gently guiding the Zorvans toward the medbay. Some of the aliens flinched at first, unaccustomed to such kindness. After years of suffering under the Vrogans, they didn't know how to react to an outstretched hand instead of a raised weapon. One of the younger Zorvans, a boy no older than 10 in human years, clutched onto Holt's arm. His tiny fingers trembled, but his grip was strong. Are we safe now?" the child asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Holt crouched down, meeting the boy's gaze. "You're safe, I promise." The boy's eyes filled with tears, tears of relief, of fear, of a life that had known nothing but hardship. Before Holt could react, the child threw his arms around him, holding on as if afraid Holt might disappear. Carter placed a hand on Holt's shoulder. "Let's get them settled first. Then we can figure out what comes next." An hour later, in the war room of the Resolute, Holt and Captain Aiden Carter stood over a holographic display of the sector. The planet they had just escaped from still flickered with battle markers. Vrogan forces sweeping across its surface, looking for any remaining resistance. "We can't go back," Captain Carter said grimly. "The Vrogans will be watching that planet like hawks now." Holt crossed his arms. "We can't just leave them behind. There might still be survivors. We're not leaving anyone behind. But we need to be smart about this. We're only one ship. The Vrogan fleet is massive." Holt exhaled sharply. He knew the captain was right. The Resolute was a powerful warship, but against an entire fleet, it was outgunned and outnumbered. "What about Earth?" Holt asked. "If we can get the Zordans there, we can get them the help they need." Carter hesitated. "That's a risk. The Council won't like it." The Council, the bureaucratic leaders of the Galactic Union. They had already abandoned the Zorvans once, refusing to intervene when the Vrogans invaded their homeworld. Bringing a group of refugees to Earth could put humanity at odds with the Union. Holt clenched his fists. "I don't care what the Council thinks. They left these people to die. We didn't." Carter sighed, rubbing his temples. "Even if we take them to Earth, what then? The Vrogans will demand we return them. They'll see this as an act of war." Holt met his gaze, his expression hard. "Then maybe it's time the Vrogans learn they don't get to decide who lives and who dies." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Carter gave a slow nod. "I'll set a course for Earth." The Resolute's engines roared to life, propelling the ship into faster-than-light travel. Stars streaked past as they left the war-torn planet behind. In the medbay, Dr. Carter continued treating the Zorvans. Some were still unconscious, their bodies too weak to recover quickly. Others sat in stunned silence, as if struggling to believe they had really been saved. One of the older Zorvans, a woman with deep scars running across her arms, finally spoke. Her voice was rough, as if speaking was something she had forgotten how to do. "Why? Why are you helping us?" Carter looked up from her work, surprised by the question. "Because you needed help." The Zorvan's eyes narrowed slightly. "But why risk yourselves? No one else did." Carter set down her medical scanner and met the alien's gaze. "Because that's what humans do." For the first time in years, the Zorvan woman smiled. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. And for the first time, hope flickered in the hearts of a people who had long forgotten what it felt like. The Resolute surged through the vastness of space, its engines burning bright as it carried its precious cargo of rescued Zorvans toward Earth, a journey that would either ensure their survival or plunge humanity into a conflict it had desperately tried to avoid. But the weight of that decision did not fall upon the refugees, who remained unaware of the political storm brewing beyond the cold metal walls of the warship. Instead, they focused on the simple, undeniable reality that, for the first time in years, they were not running for their lives, not cowering in the ruins of their shattered world, but instead they were aboard a ship where no one saw them as disposable, no one looked at them with contempt or indifference, and no one intended to abandon them again. Lieutenant Holt stood near the observation deck, his arms crossed as he watched the stars blur past, his mind racing with a mix of anger, relief, and uncertainty, for while he had done his duty, had refused to stand by and watch innocent lives be extinguished by the ruthless Rogan war machine, he knew all too well that the fight was far from over, that the hardest battles were often fought not with weapons, but with words, negotiations, and the cold calculations of those who sat in high places, untouched by the blood and suffering that stained the universe outside their pristine halls. Captain Aiden Carter entered the room, his expression unreadable, his posture stiff with the weight of command, yet there was something in his eyes that spoke of silent agreement, of an understanding between two soldiers who had seen too much, fought too hard, and lost too many to ever accept the easy path of compliance. And as he stepped up beside Holt, staring at the same endless expanse beyond the viewport, he exhaled slowly before speaking, his voice low but firm, the voice of a man who had made a decision he knew could change everything. "We're not just bringing them to Earth," Carter said, his words heavy with meaning, his gaze unwavering as he continued. "We're going to make sure the entire galaxy knows what happened to them, that the Vrogans didn't just conquer their world, didn't just take their resources, but tried to erase them, wipe them from existence while the so-called civilized powers of the Galactic Union turned their backs, pretended not to hear the screams, and convinced themselves that silence wasn't the same as complicity." Holt turned to face him fully, his jaw tightening as he realized what Carter was saying, that this wasn't just about saving a few hundred refugees, wasn't just about finding them a safe place to recover, but about exposing the truth, about forcing the galaxy to see what had been done in the name of political convenience, about ensuring that no one, neither the Vrogans nor the gutless bureaucrats who had let this happen, could ever pretend ignorance again. And though Holt had been prepared to fight for these people, had been willing to defy orders and risk his career to do what was right, he now understood that they were stepping onto a much larger battlefield, one where the weapons were information, outrage, and the undeniable weight of evidence. Down in the medbay, Dr. Elaine Carter worked tirelessly, her hands moving with precision as she treated wounds both seen and unseen. For while she could mend broken bones and close bleeding cuts, she knew that no medical technology in existence could so easily heal the scars of loss, the deep wounds left by fear, starvation, and the soul-crushing despair of believing that the entire universe had decided you were not worth saving. And as she glanced toward the Zorvans who sat quietly, their eyes haunted but no longer completely devoid of light, she felt something stir in her chest, a determination that matched her brother's, a fire that told her this mission was about more than just medical aid. It was about restoring something far greater, something these people had been denied for too long: dignity. Among the Zorvans, the young boy who had clung to Holt during the escape sat near the far wall, his small fingers tracing invisible patterns on the cold metal floor, his wide eyes taking in every detail of his new surroundings with cautious curiosity. And though he still flinched at sudden sounds, still tensed whenever a human moved too quickly, there was a softness to his expression now, a hint of trust that had not been there before. And when one of the human medics knelt beside him, offering a ration bar with a warm, reassuring smile, the boy hesitated for only a moment before taking it, his fingers brushing against the outstretched hand of a species he had once been told to fear. In the war room, Carter and Holt prepared their message, a transmission that would be sent not just to Earth, but to every neutral system, every independent colony, every outpost that still valued justice over power. And as they compiled the evidence, recordings of the Vrogan atrocities, testimonies from the surviving Zorvans, images of the once thriving cities now reduced to smoldering wastelands, they knew that the moment this message went out, there would be no turning back, that humanity would no longer be able to sit quietly on the sidelines of galactic politics, and that the Vrogans, upon realizing that their crimes had been laid bare, would respond with the only language they truly understood: war. But even knowing the storm that was coming, even understanding the dangers they had invited upon themselves, neither Holt nor Carter hesitated, because some things were worth fighting for, some battles had to be waged. And no matter how powerful the Vrogans were, no matter how deeply the Galactic Union buried its head in the sand, there was one undeniable truth that would now be heard across the stars. Humanity did not abandon those in need, did not stand idly by while genocide was carried out in the shadows, and did not fear the wrath of tyrants who believed cruelty was strength. And as the Resolute continued its journey toward Earth, as its crew steeled themselves for the firestorm that was sure to follow, the galaxy began to shift, the first ripples of change spreading outward, carried by the voices of those who had once been voiceless. And for the first time in a long time, the Zorvans were not just survivors, not just victims of war and politics. They were the spark of something greater, something that could not be ignored, and something that, in the end, might just be the beginning of the Vrogans' downfall. The Resolute continued its journey toward Earth, its massive hull cutting through the void like a silent sentinel carrying a fragile hope. The crew moved with quiet determination, aware that their mission had grown beyond a simple rescue. They had defied the Galactic Union, exposed the Vrogan Empire's atrocities, and now held the fate of an entire species in their hands. What had started as an act of mercy was now a battle for justice, one that would either ignite a revolution or make humanity a target for the wrath of the powerful. Deep within the ship, Captain Aiden Carter stood in the dimly lit war room, staring at the holographic display that flickered before him. It showed the message they had prepared, proof of the Zorvan genocide, footage of the burning cities, intercepted transmissions of Vrogan commanders discussing their plans with cold, merciless efficiency. The evidence was irrefutable. The question was no longer whether the galaxy would believe them. It was whether the galaxy would care enough to act. Lieutenant Holt entered the room, his posture tense, his jaw tight. "We just picked up a long-range signal," he said without preamble. "The Vrogans know." Carter turned his gaze from the display to his second-in-command, his expression unreadable. "How bad?" Holt exhaled sharply, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Bad. They've declared us criminals, claiming we attacked a sovereign world and abducted Vrogan subjects. They're rallying their allies, and if I had to guess, they'll be mobilizing a fleet before we reach Earth." Carter clenched his fists. "They can't afford to let this spread." "Exactly. If the galaxy learns what they did, the Vrogan Empire won't just lose its reputation, it'll lose control." Holt shook his head. "They'll come for us, Captain. We need to be ready." A tense silence stretched between them. They had known this was a possibility, had expected retaliation. But the speed at which the Vrogans were moving confirmed their worst fears. The Empire was desperate to silence them before the truth reached too many ears. Dr. Elaine Carter joined them, her face lined with exhaustion. "The Zorvans are stable for now," she reported, "but they're scared. Some of them overheard the transmissions. They know the Vrogans are coming." Holt sighed. "They're not wrong to be afraid. But we can't let that fear control us," Elaine said firmly. "These people have lived in terror for too long. They need to see that humanity won't abandon them." Carter's gaze darkened. "Then we make a stand." Holt frowned. "Against a full Vrogan fleet?" "Not directly," Carter said. "But we won't run either. We get this message out, no matter what. If the Vrogans want to stop us, they'll have to do it in front of the entire galaxy." The war room fell silent. It was a bold plan, dangerous, but it was the only way to ensure the truth reached those who needed to hear it. A sudden alert blared through the ship's speakers. A communications officer's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, we have incoming ships, multiple Vrogan war vessels, closing fast." Carter and Holt exchanged a look. "They're not wasting any time," Holt muttered. Carter straightened, his voice calm but firm. "Battle stations." The Resolute wasn't a dedicated warship, but it was armed. More importantly, it had one advantage the Vrogans didn't expect: a crew willing to fight with everything they had, not for conquest or power, but for the lives of those the galaxy had left behind. As the Vrogan ships loomed closer, the Resolute's engines roared to life, pushing forward through the darkness, carrying not just its crew and passengers, but a message that had the power to change everything. And the Vrogans would have to kill every last human on board to stop it. The Resolute surged forward, its engines burning bright against the void of space. The Vrogan warships loomed ahead, their angular hulls bristling with weapons. The message had to reach Earth. The truth had to be known. Humanity had made its choice, to stand with the helpless, to defy tyranny. But now, the question remained, could they survive long enough to make it count? Captain Aidan Carter gripped the command console, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his mind. Helm, evasive maneuvers. Keep us moving. Comms, broadcast the evidence across every open channel. Make sure someone hears it before they try to silence us. The Resolute's communication officers worked with frantic urgency, sending encrypted data bursts into the void. The Vrogans could jam their primary channels, but they couldn't stop everything. Somewhere, someone would hear the message. Aboard the enemy flagship, Vrogan Commander Threx watched the human vessel with cold amusement. Pitiful, he sneered. A single human ship dares to challenge us. Destroy them. Lances of plasma fire erupted from the Vrogan warships, cutting through the blackness. The Resolute rolled hard, dodging the first barrage, but the enemy fire was relentless. Shields flared as they absorbed the impact, the ship shuddering under the assault. Inside, Dr. Elaine Carter struggled to keep the Zorvan refugees calm. "Hold on," she shouted as the ship jolted violently. The Zorvans clung to each other, fear in their eyes. They had already lost everything. Now, the only people who had shown them mercy were fighting for their lives. Lieutenant Holt fired back, launching countermeasures and precision railgun shots. "We're not winning this fight in a straight shootout," he growled. "We need a miracle, Captain." Carter's mind raced. They couldn't outgun the Vrogans, but maybe they didn't have to. A desperate idea took shape. Engineering, rear out power to the engines. Give me every last drop of thrust. Holt's eyes widened. "You're not seriously thinking." "We cut right through their formation," Carter said. "Full speed. Head straight for the jump point." It was suicide. Or it would be, if the Vrogans expected it. But they wouldn't. No sane captain would charge straight at an enemy fleet, which meant it might just work. The ship surged forward, engines screaming, ripping through space like a bullet. The Vrogans hesitated, their cannons adjusting too slowly. The Resolute skimmed dangerously close to the enemy flagship, narrowly avoiding a fatal broadside. Almost there, the helmsman called. The Vrogan fleet scrambled to react, their ships wheeling around to cut off the escape route. But then, an explosion erupted behind them. One of the Vrogan destroyers detonated in a blinding fireball. A second later, another ship was struck from above. Energy beams carved through their hulls with terrifying precision. A new fleet had arrived. "Captain," a comms officer gasped, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth's 7th Defense Fleet." Carter's heart pounded. "Put it through." A voice crackled to life, strong and commanding. "This is Admiral Sinclair of the Terran Defense Force. We received your message. Stand by. We're bringing you home." The Vrogans hesitated. They had been prepared to silence a single rogue ship, not face a full fleet of Earth's warships. Carter allowed himself a tight smile. Looks like humanity's not so alone after all. The Vrogan fleet, realizing they were now outmatched, began to retreat. The Resolute pressed forward, battered but unbroken, as the Terran fleet formed a protective barrier around it. The message had been heard, and the galaxy would never be the same again.